The hotel shuttle pulled up in front of the Ambassador Hotel, and Marcy stepped out onto the curb. It was one of the finest hotels in the city, known for its refined atmosphere and top-tier service. A bellboy quickly approached, loaded her luggage onto a cart, handed her a small receipt stub, and welcomed her with a polite nod. At the entrance, a doorman tipped his hat in greeting before pulling open the massive brass doors, allowing Marcy to step inside. The bellboy followed a few steps behind, keeping a respectful distance. As she made her way toward the front desk, she scanned the grand lobby, hoping to spot Rick waiting for her, just as she had requested in the letter she sent. The plush chairs and sofas scattered throughout the spacious room were occupied by a handful of guests, some chatting softly while others read newspapers or sipped drinks. But despite looking around, there was no sign of her husband. A nervous knot tightened in her stomach as she wondered how Rick would react to seeing her again. Their last phone conversation, weeks ago, had been nothing short of heated, especially since he had caught her in Trey's bed in Colombia. His anger had been clear, but Marcy had made peace with the fact that she had temporarily freed him from their marriage vows during her 6-week absence. She was fairly certain that their neighbor, Leslie, had been more than happy to entertain Rick in her place. Leslie and her husband were swingers, and Leslie, in particular, had a magnetic appeal that made men stop and stare. Marcy had seen it firsthand. Practically every guy in their neighborhood openly admired Leslie whenever she walked by. And it wasn't exactly a secret that Leslie had her sights set on Rick, making it clear that she wanted him in the most physical way possible. Marcy had no doubt that Rick had taken full advantage of their hall pass arrangement, and she genuinely hoped he had enjoyed his time with Leslie. However, now that she was back, she expected that part of their lives to be over. Rekindling their marriage would be much more complicated if another woman, especially someone as striking as Leslie, was still in the picture. It hit her then that she hadn't actually spoken to Rick since that explosive phone call back in Colombia. Work had kept her occupied during the day, with back-to-back surgeries filling up her schedule. The people they treated had traveled from far and wide, desperate for the expertise of skilled American doctors. On the rare days when the medical team had time to explore, she and Trey had either spent time together in bed or gone sightseeing. She had taken plenty of pictures, some of Mount Montserrat and other attractions, and had even sent Rick a few of the best ones along with updates about her trip. But he had never responded. Not once. Maybe he was still hurt. Maybe he was trying to make a point. Even so, Marcy had no doubt that Rick loved her. It might take time for the wounds to heal, but she believed they would get past this. After all, they had spent years building a life together, and with their children grown and out of the house, this was supposed to be the start of a new chapter for them as a couple. No matter how rocky things seemed now, she was determined to find their way back to each other. Marcy was fully committed to staying with Rick for the rest of their lives. Her 6-week affair with another man had only reinforced her appreciation for her strong and loyal husband. Trey had been a skilled lover, always pushing her boundaries, but she had come to realize that their connection lacked any real affection. Once their relationship moved beyond secrecy, Trey's arrogance and outright rudeness became more repelling than exciting. At first, his dominant nature had intrigued her, but once he knew that Rick had discovered the affair, his behavior shifted. He became increasingly demanding, coaxing her into acts she had never even considered with Rick. The more degrading the request, the more satisfaction Trey seemed to derive from it. It wasn't just in the bedroom. Trey also took pleasure in verbally belittling Rick and mocking their marriage. He forced Marcy to answer humiliating questions, like which of them she preferred or who was better in bed. In the beginning, these exchanges had an illicit thrill to them, but over time, they began to irritate and anger her. When she finally asked him to stop, he doubled down, escalating the insults. He painted a picture of Rick as a weak, humiliated man, someone who should be grateful to serve him in some twisted way. At some point, Marcy just gave up, realizing that arguing only fueled Trey's cruelty. But as their trip neared its end, she felt more used than desired, more disposable than cherished. Sitting in the Bogota airport, waiting for their flight home, she finally told Trey it was over. She wanted to refocus on her marriage and rebuild what she had with Rick. Trey barely reacted. He shrugged, flashing an indifferent smirk. "You were a damn good woman," he said. "But honestly, I was getting bored anyway. This is probably for the best. Enjoy your pathetic husband." Without another word, he switched seats with Penny, ensuring he wouldn't have to sit next to Marcy on the long flight home. Looking back, Marcy couldn't understand how she had been so infatuated with Trey for so long. Now, she saw him for what he really was, a self-absorbed jerk. The relief she felt at not having to endure the flight next to him was immense. Instead, she sat beside Penny, who, like her, was drained from the trip. They spoke little, too exhausted to engage in much conversation. At one point, Penny admitted that Rick had called her hotel room, revealing that he knew about her affair with one of the doctors. Fortunately for Penny, Rick had promised not to tell her husband, Josh. She knew that if Josh ever found out, their marriage would be over. The close call had left her shaken, but after dodging that bullet, she had been able to enjoy the rest of her trip in Bogota without worry. That changed the moment they landed. As they stood by the baggage claim, waiting for their luggage, a young woman approached Penny. "Are you Penny Washington?" she asked. Penny, looking confused, nodded. "Yes." Without hesitation, the woman handed her a large manila envelope. "You've been served. Have a nice day." Marcy watched as Penny stared at the envelope like it might bite her. The server took a quick step back, raised her phone, and snapped a picture of Penny holding the envelope, proof that the papers had been delivered. The reality of the moment hit Penny like a freight train, and she broke down in tears. The rest of the team, including Marcy, tried to console her, offering empty reassurances like, "Maybe you can talk it out," or "Josh might forgive you." But deep down, everyone knew the truth. Penny's marriage was over. She eventually gathered herself, though every attempt to call Josh ended with a blocked number. Not knowing what else to do, Penny collected her bags and left the airport, taking an Uber to her parents' house in the same town where she and Josh lived. Meanwhile, Marcy couldn't shake the paranoia creeping up her spine. As she stood there, waiting for her suitcase, she found herself scanning the crowd, looking for anyone else who might be holding a manila envelope, ready to ambush her with her own set of divorce papers. But no one came. That had to be a good sign. By the time she made it to the hotel, she felt more certain that Rick had calmed down. He hadn't served her with papers at the airport, and that meant there was still hope. In just a little while, she expected to see him, and she couldn't wait to rekindle their love. As she made her way to the front desk, she reflected on everything. She had never loved anyone the way she loved Rick. After 6 weeks in another man's bed, she saw Rick's strengths and even his flaws in a new light. More than anything, she just wanted to be back in his arms. But first, they both needed to get clean STD tests. After that, she would do whatever it took to prove she was his again. Thinking about Trey left a bitter taste in her mouth. He had made her feel disposable, like an aging adult film star forced to perform increasingly degrading acts just to stay relevant. Pushing those thoughts aside, she forced a smile, determined to focus on her reunion with Rick. She had secretly hoped to find him waiting in the lobby, eager to see her. But by the time she reached the front desk, he was nowhere in sight. A young Hispanic clerk, sharply dressed in a tailored suit, looked up from his screen. A gold name badge on his lapel read Jose Gomez, front desk. Flashing a bright, practiced smile, he greeted her. "Welcome to the Ambassador Hotel. How may I assist you?" "I'm checking in," Marcy replied. "There should be a reservation under Marcy Weston." Jose nodded and began typing on his keyboard. "Let's see. I have you booked for one night, correct?" "Yes, just one night." "Perfect. You're in a room on the 10th floor with a cityscape view. Very nice. How many key cards will you need?" "Better give me 2. My husband will be joining me later." "Of course. And what credit card would you like to use for the room and any incidentals?" Marcy reached into her purse, pulled out her Visa, and handed it to him. "Thank you," Jose said, running the card through the system. "I see that our bellboy, Steve, already has your luggage, and he'll be happy to assist you to your room." "That would be great. I've got a few bags, and since my husband isn't here yet, I could use the help." As the bellboy stood at a polite distance, ready with the luggage cart, Marcy reflected on how different her arrival had turned out. Originally, she had planned for Trey to drop her off, but after cutting ties with him, taking the hotel shuttle had been the better choice. If Rick had been waiting in the lobby, seeing Trey would have only made things worse. Just as she was settling into the idea of a fresh start, Jose glanced at his screen and frowned. "I'm sorry, Ms. Weston, but your card has been declined. Do you have another one you'd like to use?" A pit formed in her stomach. She hadn't needed her credit cards in Bogota. Doctors Without Borders had covered her living expenses, and when she and Trey had gone out, he had always paid. She had only brought 2 cards on the trip, her Visa and her Discover. Both had been locked in the hotel room safe the entire time to prevent theft. Trying to stay calm, she pulled out her other card. "Do you take Discover?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, taking the card. "Let me run it through, and we'll have you in your room in no time." As he continued the check-in process, a couple arrived behind her, waiting in line. A moment later, Jose's frown deepened. "I'm sorry, Ms. Weston, but this card has also been declined." Embarrassment crept up her neck. The couple behind her shifted impatiently, making her keenly aware of how this must have looked. Someone who couldn't pay for their own room. "Those are the only 2 cards I have with me," she admitted. "I've been out of the country for 6 weeks, so something must be wrong. Let me step aside and call my husband to figure this out." Jose gave her a sympathetic nod. "Of course, ma'am. I hope everything works out. Let us know if we can help in any way." With that, Marcy stepped away from the counter, her face hot with embarrassment. The bellboy, seeing she wouldn't be checking in just yet, abandoned her luggage cart and turned his attention to the couple behind her. Marcy pulled her phone from her purse. She had turned it off during the flight and, with all the chaos at the airport, had forgotten to turn it back on. As she powered it up and entered her passcode, she expected to see missed messages from Rick. Nothing. Pressing his contact icon, she called him. As the phone rang, she noticed something else. Trey's number was still saved in her favorites. That would change as soon as she spoke to Rick. As Marcy lifted the phone to her ear, expecting to hear the familiar ringing tone, a robotic voice greeted her instead. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected and is no longer in service." Her stomach dropped. She pulled the phone away and stared at the screen, her mind racing. What the hell? That didn't make any sense. Rick wouldn't just change his number, would he? Before she could process what was happening, a man who had been sitting in one of the lobby chairs when she first walked in stood up and approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am, but are you Marcy Weston?" Startled, she looked up at him. He was well-dressed, wearing a sharp suit, and his tone was polite but firm. A flicker of fear flashed through her. "Yes, I'm Marcy," she replied hesitantly. "Can I help you?" "No, ma'am," the man said, shaking his head. "But I have something your husband, Rick, wanted you to have." He handed her a large manila envelope. Marcy hesitated for a moment before taking it. As soon as it was in her hands, the man gave a small nod and added, "Have a nice day," before turning on his heel and heading toward the hotel exit. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the envelope. But then, a small sense of relief washed over her. He hadn't said the dreaded words "you've been served," nor had he taken a photo of her holding it. Maybe this wasn't what she feared. Maybe it was a surprise. Perhaps Rick had left her a note with instructions to meet him somewhere special. Maybe he had something planned. The thought lifted her spirits, and suddenly, she was eager to see what was inside. She quickly walked over to one of the plush lobby chairs, sat down, and peeled open the envelope with anticipation. Inside, she found a neatly typed letter and a smaller, stiffer envelope tucked behind it. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out the letter and began reading. "Marcy, I'm not a coward, but as a man and as your husband, I have to tell you that your complete disregard for our marriage and the vows we took shattered me. I know you justified your actions by assuming I had some passionate affair with Deidre while we were stationed in Iraq. I didn't. The truth is, I deeply regret that there was one moment between us that wouldn't pass the spouse test. It happened after our convoy was ambushed. Insurgents took out several of our people that day. Deidre and I barely made it back alive. The fear, the adrenaline, it was overwhelming. After we were debriefed, I walked Deidre back to her quarters, and just as I was about to leave, she pulled me into a hug. She was crying, completely overcome by the weight of what had happened. I held her, trying to comfort her, and then she kissed me, hard. For a brief moment, we lost ourselves. We made out like a couple of reckless teenagers, knowing full well we were letting emotions cloud our judgment. But that's all it was, a moment. It never went beyond that. I've never slept with anyone but you in all the years we've been married. I'm sure you can't say the same. I know about Trey. That much is obvious. But I also know about the affair you had while I was deployed in Korea. You thought you were careful, but I hired a private investigator after hearing whispers about you meeting some guy at the Red Roof Inn near the hospital. You always claimed you parked there because of construction, but you and I both know better. The investigator couldn't identify the man, but I didn't need him to. I already knew, and for some idiotic reason I decided to let it slide. Maybe it was because I was away. Maybe I convinced myself that it was just a lapse in judgment. You were discreet. You never flaunted it. And you ended it as soon as I came home. But this was different. From your letter, I understand that you unilaterally decided our marriage now had an open-door policy. No need for approval, no need for consent. Just do whatever you want, no matter how it affects me. Wow, what a concept. For the record, I never slept with Leslie. The idea of you casually offering her to me like some kind of peace offering made me sick. But I did invite her and Vincent over for dinner while you were gone. And you know what I found out? That you had already been screwing Trey and wanted to drag me into some swinger lifestyle without even having the decency to tell me first. Leslie was actually surprised to learn I had no idea. She and Vincent made it clear that cheating isn't part of an open marriage. It's about honesty, about trust. So even they don't approve of what you did. You weren't being open. You were just being selfish. But hey, thanks for setting the new rules. You see, knowing that Colombia is a dangerous place and that your beloved Dr. Trey was oh so generous, I decided to do something generous too. I paid off and then canceled all of our joint credit cards. Can't have some slick doctor taking advantage of you, now can I? Remember when we met with the estate attorney a few years back to handle our wills and financial documents? I almost forgot about those durable power of attorney papers we signed that day. Turns out they still worked. After our little chat while you were in Trey's bed, I went looking through our old files. And guess what? Thanks to that handy POA, I was able to make a few changes. First, I changed my life insurance beneficiary from you to the kids. Then, I used my authority to sell our house. Yes, our house. I got a decent price, don't worry. Rod and Emily Wellman. You remember them, right? The young couple who loved our home but didn't have enough space for their growing family? Well, they live there now. They're absolutely thrilled. I told them you were on an extended work assignment, which is why you couldn't be at the closing. I'm sure they'd love for you to stop by and wish them well. Oh, and the cars? Sold those too. Didn't even need a middleman, just drove down to a few dealerships and took the best offers. The salesmen were more than happy to pay in cash. Now, about my phone. I got a new number with a different carrier, and I canceled my line from our family plan. That's why you can't reach me. Don't bother trying. Oh, and that smaller envelope inside? That's your copy of the divorce papers. Signed, sealed, delivered. Welcome to the new rules. Enjoy your fresh start, Marcy. You earned it. Rick. Marcy's hands trembled as she reached into the envelope and pulled out the smaller, heavier packet. She had thought Rick would be waiting for her with open arms. Instead, all she had left was a manila envelope and a sinking feeling that her life had just imploded. Oh, and one last thing. I can't seem to recall my new phone number. Maybe I'll send it to you one day. But don't worry, I decided not to divorce you. See, I don't really care about divorce. I never had any plans to get remarried anyway. Instead, I used some of the money from the house and car sales to hire a private investigator in Colombia. He managed to get some, let's just say, compromising audio and photos of you and your esteemed Dr. Trey. Maybe they should rename Doctors Without Borders to Doctors Without Morals. Speaking of which, I had no idea you were into such filth. I sure hope you used plenty of mouthwash afterward. Now, I figured there was no reason for me to be the only one privy to your extracurricular activities, so I went ahead and shared the investigator's full report, photos included, with the HR department at your hospital. On Friday, while you and Dr. Trey were soaring through the sky, blissfully unaware, I had a nice chat with a lady named Ms. Washington, the HR manager. She didn't believe me at first. Actually, she was pretty shocked. So I told her I intended to sue the hospital for failing to enforce the morality clause in their employment contracts, thereby ruining my marriage. I also let her know that a courier would be delivering a neatly packaged set of those lovely photos and that report first thing Monday morning. To make things easier for everyone, I included a simple contract. One where I'd agree not to pursue legal action against the hospital if they terminated both you and Trey for cause and agreed not to provide either of you with positive references. Ms. Washington seemed very interested in keeping the hospital's reputation intact, not to mention its bank account. I have a feeling your first day back is going to be quite eventful. Just like you didn't feel the need to tell me that our marriage had magically become an open one before jetting off for 6 weeks with Dr. Smarty Pants. I didn't feel the need to mention something to you either. I've always wanted to roam the open roads of this country. Take my time, see everything before I get too old. So I'm going to do just that. I'm embarking on an extended road trip, a real adventure. Could take a year, maybe even longer. I'm renting a fully equipped RV from an old buddy of mine from the service, so you won't find me through vehicle registrations. The RV isn't in my name. And let me tell you, downsizing for this trip was an experience. I kept the essentials, packed them into the RV, and got rid of everything else. I might have called to see if you wanted to keep anything, but I didn't want to disturb you. The one time I did call while you were in Colombia, you and your lover boy seemed pretty irritated with me. Wouldn't want to interrupt that again. So I made the decisions myself. I sold all of our furniture, donated most of my clothes, and got rid of all of yours. And to top it off, I had a little Bon Voyage bonfire in the backyard. Tossed in the wedding photos, your wedding dress, and every picture of the two of us. Of course, I kept the ones of the kids. Did you know burning photographs produces a lot of smoke? Ralph from next door sure noticed. He wandered over to check on me, but when I told him I was just having a little send-off fire, just once if you don't mind, he said he didn't mind at all. Now that we're officially in an open relationship, I won't have to turn down any female companionship on my travels. Good thing the military kept me in shape. If Leslie's comments are anything to go by, I think I'll still do just fine in that department. I also had a nice chat with the kids. Told them about your affairs. Told them about my travel plans. They were sad, sure, but they understood. They even asked me to send updates and photos along the way, which I agreed to, as long as they don't share my new number with you. They were happy to comply. Don't worry, though. I promised to call you just as often as you called me while you were in Colombia. Think I forgot to mention to them that your total calls to me were 0. I leave on my trip the same day you get back. I imagine traveling this way will be expensive, so I made sure to pocket the money from the house and car sales, as well as whatever was left in our bank accounts. I left your retirement savings alone, but I cashed out mine. Took the early withdrawal penalty, but I figured it was worth it. This open relationship thing sure is enlightening. But hey, I get it. If it doesn't work for you long-term and you want to make things official with Dr. Trey, you're more than welcome to file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment. I won't contest it, and I won't change the reason to infidelity. I've already gotten everything I need out of this marriage. 2 wonderful kids, some decent memories, and a pile of cash. Oh, and of course, the digital copies of all those incriminating photos from Colombia. By the way, I made sure to share them with family, friends, coworkers. I wouldn't want anyone thinking I ran off for no good reason. I even sent a few choice shots to every email in both of our contact lists, just for good measure. And yes, I thoughtfully CC'd you, so you can see exactly what I sent the next time you log into your account. But hey, I'm not all heartless. For some strange reason, I was feeling generous when I put this letter together, so I left you a little something in that smaller envelope. It's a $500 Visa gift card. Call it a parting gift. This is probably the last correspondence you'll ever receive from me. Just once, if you don't mind. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.